Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Today, my guest is Dr. Rebecca Heiss. Rebecca is a biologist and stress expert, a TEDx speaker, the founder of Acuity, which is a 360 feedback app. I'll let her tell us a little bit more about that in a moment. And she's the author of Instinct, Rewire Your Brain with Science-Backed Solutions to Increase Productivity and Achieve Success. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. I'm really excited to be here.
So thank you for taking this time today. Before we jump into your book and why you wrote it and how you wrote it, give us a little background on yourself and your history as an entrepreneur, being involved in education and entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Wow. Where do I begin? I think I'll begin when I was 8. I know it sounds like a really far thing, but stick with me here. So when I was 8 years old, I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted to be, right? I wanted to be on stage. I loved the theater. I loved the whole idea, but I didn't have a whole lot of opportunities. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, so not a huge theater district, right? So I joined the 4-H so I could start public speaking. And long story short, I did pretty well in my citywide competition. I won it. I moved on to county, did pretty well there, won it, moved on to states. And the day of the state competition, I did not win. I did not lose. I did not show up. It was right then when I started to understand how much fear, like fear of failure, fear of rejection, starts to drive all of our decisions. And from that point on, I decided I didn't want to fail for the rest of my life. Like, it was such a terrible, scary endeavor that I was like, all right, I am giving up theater, don't want to do that anymore because that's way too risky. And so I went into science because that's what I was good at. So I ended up studying biology, which, no regrets. I love biology. I love my roots. I'm a stress physiologist now. So my PhD is in evolutionary psychology, stress physiology, kind of understanding why we behave the way we do. And spent a number of years in education, as you mentioned. So was, everything from a high school teacher to a professor to a founder of a startup school, one of the founders, many founders of the startup school for impact-based learning, and ultimately ended up right back on stage. So now I'm a professional speaker. I've incorporated a lot of the biology background into creating keynotes and workshops based around understanding how our psychological evolutionary mechanisms drive us to make really poor decisions. So that's a little of the background.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, one of the reasons I invited you on here is I was interested in this intersection of entrepreneurship and education, because our audience here is mostly entrepreneurs who want to write a book. But this education facet was interesting to me too. My mother was a school teacher, and I've always been interested in education, and I have some theories and ideas about that. But tell me a little bit more about this impact learning and how you've merged entrepreneurship and education.
Yeah. So, I'm going to throw a lot of colleagues under the bus just right now, because we could have a whole discussion about the educational system and how much I think it fails our future leaders, right? Because the whole idea in education is, well, you have to achieve a certain degree or you have to achieve a certain letter grade in order to be successful. And what that does is it sets up this fear of failure, right? It sets us all up to feel like, oh gosh, I can't take risks. I can't try things. Whereas if you want to be an entrepreneur, that's exactly what you need to do, right? You have to break free of those ancient fears that would otherwise hold you back. And so in thinking about education and thinking about how we could better serve our students, it's not memorization. It's not facts and figures. We have Google for that, right? We have the technology. It's how do we think differently? How can we take mitigated risks? How can we take little steps forward, little actions? And then ask ourselves, well, why aren't we doing that now? Right? I was looking at these high school students that they were just as capable as I was. I just had a degree saying that I could do something. And so that empowered me somehow. And the reality was, no, they should be able to do what they want to do right then and there. If they have the training, if they have the gumption, go ahead and do it. So the idea behind this startup school was impact-based learning. Like, what do you want to do? What's your why? And what's holding you back? How can you achieve that? How can you learn the things that you need to learn in a stepwise fashion right? So that you can go do that right now.
And if it's not schooling that's holding you back, then let's skip the schooling and just get down to the root of it and learn what you need to learn.
Exactly. And I mean, that's why I said I might throw some colleagues under the bus, because I do come from a background of academia, right? And that was like, well, you have to have this degree. And then you move on to that. And it's like, why? Like, for what though? Right? So I have a piece of paper that nobody ever asks me about. Okay. What would stop me?
Yeah. So how did your own business, this Acuity business, how did this come into the mix here? Why did you start that? When did you start that?
Yeah, so I started that, oh my gosh, 3 years ago now. It just launched in December of this past year, right in the middle of the pandemic. What better timing? So the idea behind Acuity was I started looking at some problems that I was seeing in business. And one of the big things that I write about in my book, right, is this idea of self-deception, that we're always really good at pointing out where other people are failing. And we can really easily say, oh, that guy thinks he's so funny, or, that woman just thinks she's but we're really bad at seeing that in ourselves. And so how can we get more accurate feedback about ourselves? We live in a ratings economy where you rate your Uber driver and you rate your food and you rate all of these things, but nobody's doing that for us, especially in leadership or as entrepreneurs, where many of us find ourselves on our own, right? What are we actually good at? And how do we know that? So Acuity serves to fix that problem. It's essentially a 360 review that's ongoing and continuous. So it's a democratization, as it were, of the traditional 360, where a leader might go in and get one day of feedback for the entire year. Instead, this empowers every individual to say, okay, here's the traits or the characteristics or the skill sets that I'm interested in knowing more about for me. And then you rate yourself on a sliding scale, 1 to 10, really simple stuff, right? On how effective I am at listening or empathy or any number of other skills. Then you send that out to your friends, family, colleagues, coworkers, and they rate you on the same sliding scale. And at the end of the week, completely anonymously, right, you start to get that feedback, and you can see where your gaps are between what you think you're really good at and what the world says you're really good at, or what you think you're really bad at. And everybody says, no, you have a lot of skill there. So, for me, when I first beta tested this, one of my favorite stories to tell, I was like, I'm pretty funny. Like, I'm gonna test myself on humor at like 7, 8. I'm gonna make myself an 8 out of 10, right? And I sent it to my family. 2s. I got back 2s, right? It was like, oh, that's so painful. No, that's not true. Yeah, it's absolutely the case. But within my family, I'm a 2. So accepting that and knowing how I can show up with empathy, which is what they actually valued me for, was an empowering moment for me to recognize, oh, okay, I have other strengths here that I should be using.
So did you give up on being funny, or did you try harder?
Yeah, I mean, this is the important thing, right? Like, what do you want to do with that? I'm not giving up on being funny. I know I'm funny in certain circles, so I'm using that to my advantage, right? I know to use humor in this area, but not so much with my family. And the other thing is, now that I see this gap in my family, I'm like, okay, how can I begin to close that gap, right? So there's resources on the app to say, all right, if you want to improve your sense of humor, for example, right, here's where you can go. You can learn about, increasing your sense of humor, increasing your joke telling ability, how people react to various jokes. So it's a way to grow your potential.
So with that introduction, that background, why did you write this book? What was the motivation? What was the inspiration for it?
Yeah, so I will tell you, I was introduced kind of very circuitously to the world of leadership. My background is in biology and then education. And through this startup school, I started meeting more and more business leaders and understanding, oh gosh, funding, we have to find funding. How does this work? And I became an entrepreneur in that moment. And I realized that so many of the biological principles that I've applied to the rest of my life, nobody seemed to know about in business, right? Nobody seemed to recognize that these were the same principles that were operating on their day-to-day lives. So I wanted to find a way to bring biology into the business world. And I was lucky enough to give a TEDx talk on one aspect of that, on the fear of the other, right? Those scary people who don't look like us or don't act like us or have different ideas than us. Oh, terrifying. Which I know I'm saying that in jest, but for our brains, absolute reality, right? We see the other as a different tribe and like, oh my gosh, they're going to come over and steal all of our resources. No, they're not, right? Logically, we know this, but biologically, our brains are telling us a different story. So when we explore the biology of various behaviors, what we see is, wow, we're operating a lot from instincts that are no longer serving us today in the modern world. So that's the motivation for the book. And yeah, it's been a blast.
That's kind of like how I'm drawn to eat lots of Ben and Jerry's and sweets and stuff, because we evolved to find sweet things because they're energy rich. And yet then I go and sit in a chair for 10 hours a day and I'm not burning all those calories. And then, of course, I suffer the consequences of my biology and my hedonistic, relaxed lifestyle.
Yeah. And yet your brain is lighting up going, yeah, you're doing a great job out there because you're doing exactly what your brain is telling you to do. It's just that your brain isn't built for the world that we live in today, right? It's built for the world of our ancestors, that dangerous, sparse place. We had to layer down those fats and sugars in order to survive. But
yeah, it's interesting to think about how quickly this has all changed, because if you just look at how people lived 200 years ago, everybody was working out in the field for 10 hours a day. I mean, they didn't need to go to a gym. They were trying not to exercise because they were over exercising. And then all of a sudden, in literally 100 years, maybe, we've gone from that to we sit in front of a computer and we type all day. And now we have to go to gyms and we have to go on diets and all these things that our ancestors would have thought, why would you restrict your caloric intake? Like, you're going to die. And it's like, well, no, not today.
Right. It's completely backwards thinking, right? And when you apply that same logic to other instincts, you're like, oh yeah, of course. It's completely backwards that I should pay somebody to stare at a computer so that they'll encourage me while I'm working out. Like, that's absurd. What a waste of resources. After you've eaten too much and now you're trying to burn calories and you're paying on top of that. What are you doing? It's totally illogical. But to your brain, it's not, right? So understanding and overcoming some of those queries that our brain just doesn't quite understand because it's stuck in the world of our ancestors.
So as you were thinking about this book, who were you thinking of as the audience, as the ideal audience, the person that you really wanted to influence?
You know, I get asked that question a lot, and I know that I should have a better answer to that. And my publisher has given me answers, and my literary agent has given me answers, and my marketing people have given me answers. And I still have my own answer that is not correct, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The people that I want to influence are the people that want to be influenced, right? And that literally includes anybody who has a brain that wants to optimize its performance. That's it. Right. So the book applies certainly to business, right? Certainly to entrepreneurs, certainly to those who are wanting to take new risks and overcome some of the feedback loops that would prevent them to doing that in a safe manner in today's environment. It includes people that are just looking for self-help. They're looking for stress reduction techniques, want to understand why they seek variety, why they're never happy where they are, why they want a new partner, a new job, a new whatever. I think the book is for anyone who's looking to optimize their brain.
So why doesn't your publisher and your agent and your marketing team, why don't they like that answer?
It's way too broad, right? Like I want a specific audience. And this is classic marketing, right? If you can find your niche audience, that's ideal. And I would love to say, I've got a niche audience and that may be the case, but I'm so hesitant to nail that down and say those people are the ones I'm targeting, because the reality is I want everyone to read it.
Mm-hmm. And how's that going? Trying to get everybody to read it?
Well, I'll tell you April 27th, because that's when it actually launches. But I mean, right now, all of the marketing is targeted, right? It's like, okay, we're going to target entrepreneurs because look, all entrepreneurs are stressed out. They're operating from their survival brain. They're constantly on the lookout for what might kill them, right? And so, we've certainly targeted that. We've targeted women because, well, there's an entire chapter on sex and gender and trying to understand how those different roles affect us in today's environment. I think, we'll see how the audience pans out, but I'm hoping it's kind of a self-selecting audience. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Now, by the time people are listening to this, the book will be out, so you can go get it. And if you're part of that group of everybody, or you're an entrepreneur, or you're one of the other groups that Rebecca mentioned, then definitely go check it out. I've got it on pre-order, I believe. So
thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
So with your book, you opted to go the traditional publishing route rather than self-publishing. Tell us a little bit about that. Did you consider doing self-publishing? Was there a specific reason you went after a traditional publisher?
Yeah, so I did consider self-publishing, but this was the entrepreneur spirit in me, the one who said, okay, I can do it this way. I know how to do it this way. What would it look like if I did it? Right? How could I make the leap? And if I could make the leap, what would that look like? So I consider myself one of the very lucky ones in that I pushed out what I will call very graciously a book proposal to 50 to 75 agents, literary agents. And I had one pick it up and respond to me within a matter of hours and just said, hey, I'm interested. Tell me more about this. Now, this is my current literary agent. She's amazing. A little shout out to Lucinda Literary. Incredible, incredible team there. And I was able to work with her to develop an actual book proposal. I think I sent her like 5 chapters of what I thought was going to be my book, which is not at all my book, right? But once I started working with her, she really helped me guide me through the process of what it means to publish a book in a traditional publication format. And I'm a newbie, but it was a great experience for me to understand.
Now, you had years of research behind you already because you're writing about thoughts you've had for a long time, ideas that have been developing. How much time did you have to put into research and gathering more ideas and putting more thoughts together as you were going through the writing process?
The writing process was, I think of it as like disruptive evolution. So evolutionary biologists, right? Bear with me. Most people think of evolution being a slow, gradual process. And that can be the case, but frequently it's long periods of stasis with these massive like eruptions of change. And that was sort of how I wrote. It was like, oh gosh, I can't do it. And then an idea would come to me, or I'd see something on the news or something would spark me. I'm like, boom, and I would pop out a chapter pretty quickly. To your point, these are ideas that I had thought about for a long time. That said, when 2020 happened, I had to rewrite most of my book. I had this game plan for, okay, here's how we're going to do this. And then our world changed like this. Racial tensions increase. We have a pandemic, all of these things that were sort of natural in the book. Like, okay, when you go to work, oh, wait, we're not going into work anymore. Okay. How do I adjust for this new environment that we're in? So there was a lot of rewriting. But the original concepts, I say, the core was still pretty solid.
Were there points at which you got stuck with the writing? It sounded like you got off to a pretty good start, but were there points where you got kind of stuck, you didn't know where to go? And if so, how did you get unstuck?
Yeah. I think, having writer's block is classic for any writer. And so there were plenty of points in the book where I got stuck. I'd say there's 2 things. One, I have an amazing team, right? I had an incredible editor that I could send something to and say, do you think this is the right direction? Do you have any thoughts, ideas? And she would bounce ideas back to me. So she's hands down having somebody that you can just talk to, bounce ideas off of, tell you honestly, oh, that's terrible. Like having that honest, open relationship with somebody is a game changer. And the other thing for me, actually, I'll give you 2 more things. The other thing for me was sitting down to write and just forcing myself to write 1 sentence. I didn't come in with like 2 hours worth of work to do, or I'm going to finish this chapter today. It's you're going to write 1 sentence. And usually if I committed to that, I'd write a paragraph or maybe 2 paragraphs, or I'd get into it and I'd start really writing. But the dread of having to sit down and write a whole chunk, I'd put it off. If I just have to write a sentence, I can do it. And it would usually get me into the flow. And finally, the biggest tip, walk away. Just walk away. The best ideas, the best things, the best conclusions would come to me, right in the middle of the night, or when I was first waking up, or I was sitting in the shower, or on vacation, right? Completely removed, because it allows my brain to like step away, take a deep breath, start processing those subconscious thoughts that are coming up, which is honestly, hilariously, some of the stuff that I talk about in the book is taking that step back, getting out of the weeds, sometimes produces the best results.
There's this saying that research is me search. How much of this book, as you were writing it, were you thinking, this is really for me? This is about me?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I would love to tell you that this is not like a 100% self-serving book, but I wrote this book for me because, I mean, I think all of us are stuck in our instincts to some extent. And I told you how I started this whole career was based on fear. And I have just recognized these same patterns again and again and again in my life. So I wrote this book specifically for me to overcome each of these instincts. And then if it helps anybody along the way, all the better.
So tell us a little bit more about working with a traditional publisher, because it sounds like they're providing you with a lot of support. They're helping you along the way. Have there been any hiccups in that or unexpected things where you thought, oh, it's going to be this way, but then you realize after you get in the process, oh, actually, this is how they do it? Just for those who have never worked with a publisher before, what would you tell somebody looking into that?
Yeah, I mean, first, let me say I've had an incredible experience. And again, going in as a total newbie, I was very much hands off. And I think that overall, that's been a good approach in saying, you guys are the experts here. Tell me what it is that I need to do, and I will do it. I think the biggest conflict or the biggest surprise that I had was the cover. So here I am, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've got all these ideas for the cover, and I'm pitching all this stuff, and they're like, no, we have it. It's this. I'm like, no, I don't like it though. I don't get it. And they're like, no, we sat down with our team. We've done some research. This is it. And so we went back and forth. And I will tell you, I was in tears. I'm not going to lie. I was absolutely like devastated. I was like, that's not what I had envisioned. This is all wrong. And at the end of the day, it's their cover and it's great. And it's absolutely fine. And it fits, right? It fits in with business book, self-help book, like it works. But I was actually surprised at my own reaction and how vested I'd become and how, frankly, blinded I'd become by my own kind of stubbornness of like, no, it can't be it. We have to have a different idea. And as they pointed out again and again and again, well, that looks like a biology book. Here, let's look at what this would look like in this section. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Or that looks like a novel. I'm like, yeah, but it's cool. Oh, I see. Not a marketing expert. All right. So there certainly were some hiccups. I have been amazed at the number of times I have read this book and the number of mistakes I still find in it. And the number of other people that have read it and done the same thing. So it's an ongoing, never feeling finished kind of experience.
That's a tough one because I read CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and I'll find errors in articles. And I'm like, come on, guys. I mean, don't you have like 3 editors going through this before it goes live, before it gets printed? And yet here's this typo here. And yet then when I wrote my first book, there's all sorts of errors in it. And I mean, I had 10 people go through that book and I went through it 6 times. Yep. And then you get to the end and there's still errors in it. It almost seems like it's impossible to track down every single one.
I'll tell you, I had the unboxing experience, right? When I first got my copies and I opened it up and I was so excited. I flipped through and I kid you not, it was literally this. And I was like, oh my God. Oh my gosh, found my first error, found my first typo. And okay, that's all right. We have to be okay with that. Deep breath. It doesn't invalidate all the other research. It's just a typo.
So with the pandemic and COVID, we're recording this March 15th. It's coming out April 27th. We're still kind of in this zone where there's a lot of uncertainty and things kind of seem to be opening up with the vaccines, but who knows where it's going to be a month from now. What plans have you created with your publisher to market and promote this? You're probably not doing the standard go across the country book tour type of thing. So how did your publisher address this and say, okay, here's what we're going to do to get the word out about this book?
Yeah, that's That's a great question. When I first wrote the book, I was like, oh, well, look, I'm a professional speaker. Like, I'll just get in front of audiences like I do, and they'll line up and buy the book afterwards. No, not anymore. So, there's been a pretty massive shift, as you said, and the publisher has been very responsive in that. We're doing some book giveaways. They've given me a ton of copies to send out to people to help sort of promote it on social media. What I ended up doing was I created a 7-day instinct challenge to put on Facebook and Instagram. And, it seems to be the thing to do right now. And then I created a whole website with chapter summaries. So video chapter summaries of each of my chapters of my book, so that, people can start engaging even when we're not in person. We can engage with each other through the internet, and, sort of share that book club type experience at a distance.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Now, do you also have an email list? Are there other ways that you're promoting the book?
Yeah, so I have a newsletter that I send out, every other week with highlights from the book, highlights from Acuity, highlights from the speaking stuff, or weird things that I dig up that are relevant or some way speak to some of the chapters of the book. But even that it's a hard thing to build. And I would challenge anybody that's thinking about writing a book. That's the first step. The first step is to find your audience. And coming from somebody who just said, I don't know, my audience is everyone. I know that sounds a little ridiculous, but that truly, I think, is one of the hardest pieces and one of the most important pieces to writing a successful and marketing a successful book.
If you could go back to when you were just starting to work on this book or just coming up with the idea for it, and then look at everything you've done since then, what are some of the changes that you would make, things you would do differently?
I think I would be less restrained in my writing. Every time I wrote, I tried to write it as if it was the final draft, right? Like, this is how it's going to look when it's published. And I think that held me back from really flowing in my writing. And so I think I would save more. I would just save all of the junk that I collected and have sort of an ongoing notes section that I could refer back to. I definitely would catalog better. I would have things and ideas for one chapter, and I would put them somewhere and then I'd lose them. So I think organization from the start, having folders, having ongoing, this is an idea, and tagging it with certain words that you can come back and search for is going to be huge. That's for my next book. That is the system I'll use.
So are you already thinking ahead to your next book?
Yeah, this is one of the hardest bits is I am really excited about an idea that I have right now, and I really want to start writing, but I'm hitting the brakes because we have to get this book out and successful first before anybody will look at me again. So, yeah.
You do sound like a visionary entrepreneur then, always starting multiple things, starting the new thing before the other thing is even off the ground.
Yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem actually I address in chapter 3, variety, right? Just constantly seeking the next thing. Oh, but what's next? What's next? It's a challenge, and it's one that our brain certainly does not help us with.
Exactly. Does your publisher help you keep on track with that a bit as well, to keep you focused on the here and now in this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I actually reached out to them and I said, hey, just so you know, I'm thinking about this. And they said, great. But first, that's wonderful. But first, Rebecca, we've got this book to launch. Stay on it.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit more about your platform. We talked about your email list. You've got the speaking career, but tell us about the other assets you have or building blocks of your platform, your website, other things that you've put together and how you're using those to promote the book.
We've got a couple things that kind of tie together. So I have a website that is mostly my speaking, right? It's RebeccaHeiss.com, and it's all of my speaking topics and keynotes and workshops. But on it, I certainly have the book bolded and highlighted. And so I built a second web page that is strictly for the book. So it's instinctbook.com, right? And on that page, I have the book club, which is essentially prompts, challenges. Think about, if you were to create a study guide for your book, what questions would be asked? What would come up in a book discussion? So I kind of preemptively asked those questions. I created a video chapter summary for each of the chapters of the book. Put together some live question answer portions there. Host a challenge there that's going on to social media. And then I have a podcast as well called The Fearless Year, in which I'm interviewing experts from all of the traits for Acuity, which is the mobile app on self-awareness. And self-awareness is chapter 4, right? Self-deception. So all of these things, none of them are critically related, right? I could remove any component, but they all tie together in a nice sort of fashion. I'm speaking about fear, and I'm speaking about awareness, and I'm speaking about stress. And each of those are chapters in the book, and each of those align with certain things that we're talking about on the podcast, and certain ways that we can overcome those are given in the book.
So speaking of fear and awareness, so there are parts of your book that exist in parts of other people's books. Like Tasha Eurich has her book Inside about self-awareness. And there's this book, Leadership and Self-Deception. And you mentioned self-deception. And this happens to all of us as authors, that we start writing and we think, wait, somebody already covered this. It's already out there. Maybe I shouldn't write this book. Did that thought go through your head? And how did you push through that?
Every other day that thought went through my head. Like, what am I doing? Everybody else has said this before. So, it comes back to something that I thought about a lot when I first came into leadership. Well, let me back up. One of the things that I would say to anybody who is questioning whether or not they should offer their perspective is this. The answer is yes, because when you look at the top, for me at least, the top 100 leadership books on Amazon, 91% of them are written by white men. Now, no problem, right? That's good for some people. That's a really important thing. I'm not saying that white men, you shouldn't be writing these books. You shouldn't be so prolific. That's great. These are good books. Every single one of them I would recommend. But it does mean there are some voices that are missing. And I'm not saying that if you're a white male, you shouldn't write that book. I'm saying you're going to offer a new perspective, right? And just because race and gender are the ones that I refer to there's all kinds of new perspectives, new opportunities. I'm coming at it as a woman from a biological perspective, right? So has leadership been talked about before? Sure. Has self-deception been? Sure. All of these things have been talked about before, but have they been seen through the lens of a female stress physiologist? Probably not. So I think everybody has a unique perception and unique lens through which they can look. And so if you're considering doing this, think about your own stories. Think about what lens you see the world through. And then just because something's been seen one way doesn't mean you can't offer something new to it.
I use that word story. How did you use storytelling within your book?
Yeah, I think narrative is so important. This is the biological basis. If you want to go back, this is how we remember anything. It's through storytelling, right? That was how we passed things down for hundreds of thousands of years. So it's how our brain remembers things the most. So I think, I can throw facts and figures at you all day long. You won't remember it. If I can move you through a story, if I can use emotion for you to say, I recognize myself there. I remember that experience that I had in that situation. Now you've pulled somebody into the story, into the book itself. And now they're seeing themselves in that same situation, and it applies to them more. So I think the more you can use story to pull people into that book, the more applicable they'll find your solutions.
I've interviewed other people who talk about story. One guy actually specializes in storytelling within business. But for you, with your evolutionary biology background, can you tell me a little bit, why do we remember stories so well? Why do they stick? It's kind of fascinating when you think about it that, you throw a string of facts at me and I can't remember it 30 seconds later. And yet there are stories that I heard 30 years ago when I was a kid, and I only heard that story once, and I can retell that story today in pretty accurate detail. Why is that? Why do our brains work that way?
Yeah, I think, our brains are lousy at remembering numbers and statistics because they don't light up the same pathways. when I tell a story, what that does, if I do it properly, is I elicit emotion in the people that are listening. And when you elicit emotion in the brain says, oh, wait a second, this is something I need to pay attention to. Because if it's stress or anger or fear or danger or excitement, I want to be able to return to the things that excite me. I want to be able to seek out that adventure, and I want to avoid the disaster, the catastrophe, the thing that happened to that person. It's a way of sort of vicariously learning. So, we tell a lot of stories to kids, and a lot of them are about monsters and the scary things. And if they do wrong, they get eaten. Right? Have you ever, when you think about like the stories that we tell, the fairy tales that we tell our kids, they're terrifying.
All those weird fairy tales and babies falling out of trees.
Yeah. But they're really they're evolutionary stories of like, fear the other, right? Stay away from strangers. Don't climb high things. Like all of the things that you could have died from back in the day. So they elicit this fear response, but it's a way of vicariously learning what we should stay away from, what we should be excited to move towards. Storytelling is super powerful for the brain.
Great. So as we wrap things up here, Rebecca, talk to us a little bit about, again, the advice that you would give to, there are these entrepreneurs out there, just like you. They have a business just like you, and they're thinking, I might want to write a book. I think this could help me in my business. I think this could help me to get a message out. Being on this stage where you are, where your book is almost coming out, it's going to be out just in a month from now. What advice would you give to that entrepreneur who's considering this journey, considering writing a book? Is writing a book for everybody? And what advice would you give to this entrepreneur who's just kind of on top of the fence?
Yeah, I mean, two things. One, if it doesn't burn you, right? If it doesn't burn from the inside, like you have to get this out, don't write it. There'll be something else that will. And when you feel that, when you're like, this is the message, this is the thing that happens. And I'm not saying don't start. Like it might burn for a little bit, and you start and you get something done and you're like, there's plenty of ideas that I've gotten out and I'm like, this is it. This is not it. And then it kind of fizzles for me. And then you will hit some points along the way in writing that book, but it has to burn from the start. Like it has to be something so powerful, so driving that you want to get up and push it out to the world. The other thing, the big thing is I'll say, if you are doing this for the money, run the other way. Right? Like nobody will make money from publishing a book unless you're like a superstar. Don't count on this on bringing in income. It's really a piece of recognition and a way to expand your audience and move this message out into the world.
And so what are you hoping to see in terms of results from your book? Of course, you want a bunch of people to buy it and to be moved by it and change their lives and everything. But in terms of yourself, what are you looking to get from the book once it's out there and making that difference?
Honestly, so I know this is going to sound really cheesy, but I already feel like I've accomplished it. Like having this book be a reality, I feel like I've written the message that I really wanted to get out into the world. And now it's out there. And if it sells 2 copies, that's 2 people's lives that will have heard the message that I desperately wanted to get out. If it sells 10,000 copies, awesome. If it sells 20 million copies, woo! Look, I of course want to achieve as great a success as I can. But to me, success is not, it's not relative, right? It's not in comparison to other people. Success is I have a book in hand that conveys the message that I have always wanted to convey, and it's going out into the world. So to me, I'm just really thrilled that I've had that opportunity.
Awesome. Sense of achievement. Well, thanks so much for being with us here today. Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah, they can find me at Rebecca Heiss. That's RebeccaHeiss.com. And you can certainly find all about Instinct and Acuity and all the other things that are going on. Our podcast at The Fearless Year, podcast.com, all the things. I'd be happy to talk further about any questions or concerns you all have.
Spell Acuity for us to make it sure we can find that.
Right, because this is another marketing fail, I'll be honest. It's ICUE, like Q, ICUEITY.com, Acuity.
Awesome. Thanks again, Rebecca, so much for being with us here today to talk about your book. Looking forward to it coming out.
Thanks so much, Josh, and thank you to all your listeners.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.